second podcast, and yeah, what can I say about it? It was very good. I personally think there was room for improvement due to the fact that there was one time where we already talked about something. So at the start we mentioned of which players are in form for each club, and then when we got to when I think it was like near halfway, maybe about 12 minutes, I went again. I said, right, which players, and obviously Josh reminded me that we already talked about them. But obviously that's not a big thing. I just know that not to talk about them again. But I've personally learned that, and from last week, that confidence is a thing, as well as like whilst you're recording it. If you're confident and you're bouncing off each other, the podcast will flow much better. Also, the fact that the podcast was very strong. Sonia told us this week as well, which I learned about podcasts, the fact that you can actually post these virally and you can make a living out of it. Well, maybe not a living, but actually, yeah, a living. But like people do this as a job. So she said she was happy for us to post it and everything, and maybe like just see where it goes. I was also in another podcast. I was in Sophie's and Jess's podcast, and theirs was about relationships and kind of stuff, and that went really well and really interesting because they wanted to get like a male's perspective view, my age, and yeah, that went really well. Like I really enjoyed doing their podcast. I talked about the fact that of how like I've been in a relationship and all that kind of stuff, but it was really good from going to a different complete podcast, the podcast that I was in, and like see a completely different but like overall, this like the podcast that I've done, I've learned a lot. Sonny said we're not going to be doing we don't have to record any podcasts anymore. So obviously me and Josh have recorded them, but I've learned a lot from podcasts. I've learned that you can talk about as much you want. They can be as long as they want. They can be 5 minutes. They can be an hour. They're really good. I've actually started listening to podcasts. Some of the podcasts. Emily mentioned a podcast she listened to, and I actually listen to them now. So overall, for this whole experience podcast, I've actually learned a lot about. But yeah, today went really well, and the podcasts have gone really well. So hopefully, and there's been so much room for improvement, so it's gone really well.